Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Just got a short piece for you today. After the last video where we looked at setting up 4K triples, went into a ton of detail on how to do that and how to get everything running smoothly from a sim racing perspective. What I wanted to touch on today was how to do 4K streaming whilst also running 4K triples. Been a bit of a journey for me. I kind of gave up streaming for a month or so as I was trying to figure it out. Couldn't get smooth gameplay and streaming at the same time. However, those of you that have been watching on YouTube will know over the last couple of months I've managed to solve that and not only get the 4K streams to run pretty smooth, I've even been able to bring back my third-party overlays for the stream as well as on screen for me. So that's going to be the focus of today's video. It's mainly going to be focused on the streaming settings within OBS, as that's the platform I use, but I will touch on a couple of other areas as well around Race Labs and around how I set up my third-party overlays to function on the 4K stream. So before we get into configuring the stream in OBS, one setting I want you to take a look at within Windows, and it's one called Game Mode. So you can see here, if I go into Settings, go into Gaming, and go into Game Mode, you'll see for me that I have this set off. You can indeed click the More About Game Mode there to try and learn a bit more about it. And by default in the past, I used to always have this set to on. I just assumed if there's a game mode setting and I'm gaming, I should have this switched to on. However, in my research around getting Race Labs and third-party overlays to run successfully on triple 4K screens, what I came to understand is if you are gaming, it doesn't even only apply to sim racing, but if you're gaming and you have a bunch of companion apps running at the same time, there's a chance that game mode could limit the performance of those companion apps, cause them to underperform, and therefore could bring stutters into your gameplay. So because often when we are streaming, obviously we're running at least OBS as well as the game, but we may well be running overlays in sim racing so that we can kind of show position, etc. for those watching the stream. I recommend trying game mode set to off. You can obviously try it either way, but I have found smoother gameplay, less glitches by turning game mode off when I'm streaming and running overlays at the same time. So just something I want you to do a little bit of research on, and as I said, I now run with game mode defaulted to off when I'm in the sim. Okay, so we're in OBS. A couple of things to think about real quickly. One, pretty obvious, but just double check your internet speed. Make sure that you're getting the speed and the latency that you expect. Speedtest.net is something that I use all the time. And to be honest, I almost run a test every time I do an endurance race or I'm doing a 4K stream just to make sure I don't need to do a restart of the router. I find sometimes that's needed just to bring the speed back up to what I'm expecting. Reason it's important, upload speed, so you're going to be pushing anywhere between 20,000 to 25,000 kilobytes per second to achieve a good quality 4K stream. So that means your upload speed is going to need to be decent. It also needs to be a fairly stable internet connection, so where you can, try to connect via Ethernet rather than Wi-Fi. I'm sure it's possible over Wi-Fi. I just find that Wi-Fi is a little bit less reliable, and especially if you're trying to do 4K streaming, plugging in through an Ethernet cable is just going to give you that little bit more reliability. And the second thing is going to be the settings and the variability that you might need to go after when you're setting up OBS for your 4K stream. So I'm going to take you through the specific settings that I use that work really well for my setup, so my GPU, my CPU, and my internet connection. And what I'll do as I go through is I'll flag the settings where there is a little bit of adjustability. Bitrate is a really good example where if you push that to be too high, it can just create drop frames. I mean, the 4K stream doesn't work very well, so you might be able to play around with that. And you may not be able to put exactly the same bit rate in as me because, of course, your internet speed may be different. So I'll give you the tour, all of the settings that I currently use, all attached to the YouTube stream that I'm currently using, but just bear in mind, it might be a little bit of an adventure for you as well, and you may need to make some minor adjustments to what I'm showing you just to make sure the stream works well and nice and smoothly for your setup. Okay, let's dive into some of the simpler settings right off the bat. let's first of all jump into the stream menu here. Now, as far as I'm aware, YouTube is one of the only services, I think, where you can stream 4K. Could be wrong. Feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm fairly sure Twitch is not at the 4K streaming level, at least for me. I don't have a ton of subscribers. I know I'm limited personally to 1080p. But YouTube is great. It's a really good service for streaming in 4K. I've had a lot of success with it. The one thing to bear in mind is YouTube will have two options in the service drop down here. It'll have HLS and RTMPS. From memory, I think it needs to be HLS for 4K streaming. I know it certainly needs to be that when you're streaming in HDR, which we'll come on to. I don't do 4K streaming in HDR, but with HLS, one of the things that you get here is the maximum video bitrate goes all the way up to 51,000 kilobytes per second, and that gives you plenty of headroom for the sort of additional video bitrate you need when you are streaming in 4K. So we're going to jump down to video for the next one. Now, you'll see for me that I can't edit this, and as I said, it's because video output is currently active because I am recording using OBS at the moment. But you just want to make sure that your base and output resolution is set to 4K, i.e. what your a single monitor resolution is. So for me, 3840 by 2160, that matches the base to the output. That's great. There's no downscaling required. And then the last setting on this screen is picking the FPS value that you want to stream in. So generally the choice will be either 30 FPS or 60 FPS. Now in lower resolutions like 1440p, 1080p, streaming in 60 frames per second is absolutely no problem. It's all good. When you do 4K streams and you are doing 60 frames per second, obviously that is putting more stress on the system and it's putting a bit more stress just on the internet connection as well. I tried 4K streams in 30 frames per second, did some tests, just didn't like it, felt that it was a bit choppy, so I was frustrated by that. So I do run mine in 60 frames per second, but I did have to make a few compromises elsewhere just to make sure that the stream still run smoothly. So that's something we'll come on to, but really on this screen, you just want to make sure base and output are set to 4K, set to whatever one of your single monitor's resolution is, that there's no downscale filter applied, and then you select the FPS value that you're looking for. Okay, next one to take a look at will be output. This is specifically for, as you can see, streaming, recording, audio, replay buffer. We're just going to look at streaming today. Most likely you've already got this audio one figured out. I mean, you can see for me here, I'm set to a 320 audio bitrate for my track one. The default is 160, but typically if you're streaming, you want to push it up to 320. Anyway, back to the streaming tab. This can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of what do all the settings mean, you know, what are the key settings for 4K streaming and what are the values you should be looking for. So I did follow some quite good guides online on the OBS forum and just some other YouTube videos to try and figure this out for 4K streaming, because it was a little bit different to how I had things set up on my 1440p stream that I used to use last year. So let me just take you through the key settings. So this top box for streaming settings, it's grayed out because I'm just currently recording at the moment. The video encoder, you want to make sure that that's set to the one that you want to select. For me, it's the HEVC NVIDIA encoder. It'll of course be called something different if you're using an AMD GPU. So just make sure that's set to the right encoder for you. Now, if you're not sure what the right encoder is, because even for a single GPU, there may be multiple to choose from, just do a little bit of research online. You can just type into Google the name of the encoder that comes up here. That should give you the information that you need to make sure that it's the right encoder for the GPU, but also that it's the right encoder that's going to work well with your streaming service. And in my case, that's going to be YouTube. Now, onto the encoder settings just below. I'll just talk through these one-on-one. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert, but I can talk you through the ones that I know work well for me in terms of 4K streaming. So rate control, constant bitrate, that's usually pretty standard for streaming, so no change there. Bitrate. Now, earlier on in the video, I said I'd flag the settings where there's going to be some variability and where you might need to go through a little bit of trial and error. This would be one of those. So I have tried bitrate at 20,000, at 25,000, 15,000, and I just did practice streams in YouTube, privately, so they didn't go live for everyone to see. But just to get a sense of how much of an impact does the bitrate have to the overall quality of the stream. I found anything less than 20,000 kilobytes per second had a bit of a quality issue for when I was streaming. And bear in mind, I'm streaming at 60 frames per second. If you are streaming at 30 frames per second, then that might be okay. Again, my recommendation when you're streaming, from a sim racing perspective, 60 frames per second looks a lot better for the viewer than 30. And you can see I landed on 22,000, seemed to be a good balance. I did try to get up to 25,000 kilobytes per second, but I was getting a ton of drop frames and it just wasn't particularly stable, so it was just too far. So I then just worked out what was the sort of safest I could go up without getting any drop frames. For me, that's 22,000. So recommendation for bitrate is do have a play around with it. There's not going to be a single right answer for everyone, but something within the 20,000 to 24, 25,000 is likely going to be a good spot if you're doing a 4K stream and you're looking for 60 frames per second. Scrolling down a little bit further here, we have got the keyframe interval. I leave this set to 0, which is auto. Don't know a ton about that, to be honest, so just don't mess with it. The preset. This is another one where there is some variability and you can certainly play around with this. Really here you're trying to get a balance of quality versus performance for the stream. The higher you go in the number, you'll increase the quality, but that could have a negative impact on the performance of the stream. So for example, when I was running 1440p streams, I think I had this set to P6, because it was good quality and it didn't have any impact on the system and the stream did not drop any frames. However, couldn't do that for 4K streaming, had to bring it down. So I've settled on P5 for slow good quality. I could go lower, but I don't get any drop frames setting this to P5 slow good quality. So that at least would be my recommendation as a starting point. Any higher than that, I really struggle to get a stable stream. So just bear in mind, if you are trying to push the quality higher, do some practice runs, make sure that the stream is stable at those at that quality level. Tuning I didn't touch, set to high quality, same for multipass mode. These should all be the default values. Now coming down to profile, this is related to the color profile that OBS is going to use. Now despite me running my screens and iRacing in HDR, so that's what I see it in, I do stream in SDR, just because HDR, again, it's increased bandwidth required because of the quality of the colors. And although that probably means I lose a little bit in terms of color quality on the stream, it's honestly not that much. So I have OBS convert my HDR screen, if you like, into SDR before sending it up to YouTube. And one of the ways you can do that is just make sure that this profile is set to main. And to close it out, I don't touch any of these additional settings below. I believe these were all set to standard, so look ahead is turned off. Adaptive quantization is ticked. No idea really what either of those do, and feel free to do some research. B-frames 2, B-frame as reference disabled, and split encode set to auto. So as I said, it can be a little bit overwhelming what all of these things means, but in reality, a lot of these settings you can leave at the default value. So take a look at what your default values are compared to what you're seeing on mine in the screen. And the first place to come if you are struggling to get consistent stream, or you're dropping a ton of frames, will be to look at the bit rate that you're pushing, make sure that it's not too high, and then to take a look at the preset around quality. And again, play around with those until you are comfortable with the quality of the stream, but also the performance of OBS. Okay, last two menu items to look at. Let's just jump into settings and general for this one. Most of this is all just set to the default. One setting I'll bring your attention to, though, is this automatically record when streaming. Now, there may well be occasions where you have a live stream running, but you want to record at the same time. That, of course, allows you just to have a copy of that locally. Again, my recommendation here is I would probably not have that running. I'd probably untick that just to give your system a little bit of a break. Now, if the recording settings are set to exactly the same as the streaming settings, and you've got more than one encoder chip on your GPU, it may not impact performance and you may be absolutely fine. But the health warning around this one is if you are going to tick it, because you always do want a separate copy recorded as well as what's streamed, just double check that your GPU has at least 2 encoding chips on it, so that that's not just going to pull performance away from your GPU. You know, when you're running triple 4K screens, you are pushing even the latest graphics cards really to the max, and so anything you can do to kind of give them a break is going to be worth doing. If you have a couple of encoder chips on that GPU, this setting might work absolutely fine. I know I do on the 4090, but I still keep it unticked because I just don't want any extra processing happening, you know, when I'm streaming in 4K and when I'm running triple 4K screens. So just something to double check. And if you are going to tick it, you know, double check what the impact is for you. And then the other thing to look at, sorry, this is going to be in the advanced tab. Just take a look at the video settings here. Again, we talked about in the output tab, the color profile, which is set to main. Main is SDR, main 10 would be HDR. But when you get into the advanced settings in OBS, you also have another area here, which is looking at the color format and the color space. So this should be the default, because OBS will typically default to recording and streaming in SDR. So the color space will be rec.709, not sure what that stands for, color range full, and the color format here NV12. However, if you have previously recorded in HDR and you've streamed in HDR, then this video format may be set to different. And again, I'm not saying that you can't stream in 4K and in HDR, but it will put more of a strain on the system. It'll put more of a strain on OBS and the internet connection, so you just need to test it. But if you want to do like me, or you only have an SDR setup anyway, just come in here and double check that it is indeed set to SDR, so it's not telling OBS to try and record or stream with HDR color formats or color spaces. Once you've got all of the settings configured, you should be good to go for a practice stream. One final thing to check though before you do. When you're looking at your sources, specifically the type of display capture that you're using with OBS, make sure you are using game capture. So you'll see mine here, it's called iRacing. Obviously the iRacing is not running, so you can't see it at the moment, but it is important to select game capture over either window capture or display capture, because it's a little bit less taxing on OBS and therefore less taxing on your system. For the longest time, I was just using display capture. It ran fine, to be honest, but of course I was doing that in 1440p, so maybe, you know, there's a bit less of a performance impact. However, when we're doing 4K triples for the sim, and then we're trying to stream in 4K as well, you're just pushing the system kind of to the max. So if you use any other display capture currently, I would recommend trying out game capture for the particular sim you're running, as it's just gonna give you a little bit more performance and probably just a little bit more stability for your stream. And with that, you're ready to do a test broadcast. It's not something I'm going to show you here, because no doubt you already know how to stream if you're watching this video, but there is one final setting when you're setting up your broadcast that you need to pay attention to when you're streaming in 4K versus say 1440p or 1080p, and that is latency. So whether you're setting up your broadcast within OBS, as I'm showing you here, or whether you're setting this up directly in YouTube or another streaming service, there will be a setting somewhere which dictates what latency you want to apply to the particular broadcast. And just know that when you're streaming in 4K, you're going to need to set this to normal. I used to have this set to low when I was doing 1440p, and it was still low when I did my first practice stream in 4K, but the stream did not run effectively. I think it did connect to YouTube, but it was extremely choppy, dropped tons of frames, and was just not at all successful. As soon as I switched this setting back to normal, everything was flawless, worked super smooth. So just know, streaming in 4K, when you're setting up the broadcast, just make sure you've got latency set to normal. Before we wrap this one, let's just have a quick chat about the length of the stream, just something else that I came across the other week after I'd finished my Bathurst 12. So if I just jump to this, this is the message that's currently there for my Bathurst 12 stream. It's not available to search currently, even though it is published, and this is about 2 weeks after the race is finished. I think the issue here is the overall length. of the live stream. It was up for 21 hours and I had absolutely no issues during that live stream. People were logging in, logging out throughout the course of the 21 hours, so that was super. But ever since the stream finished, YouTube has not been able to publish a recorded version. Now, if I jump back to a prior stream, which was probably a month before Bathurst 12, this was Insta Endurance at Road America. This stream was up for over 3.5 hours, no problem. Again, stream was fine, but also the publishing post stream was not an issue either. I think it probably took between 2 and 6 hours for the post stream for YouTube to then sort of republish it back in 4K quality. So there's clearly a challenge with either just the overall length of my Bathurst 12, where 21 hours is just too long for YouTube to then be able to republish, or it's a combination of the overall length of the stream combined with the fact that it's a 4K stream, so it's just maybe too much for the servers to handle. So as I said, you can stream for 21 hours, because I did do, and the stream will work absolutely fine. I had no issues at all. But sadly, the published, recorded version of the stream looks like it's never going to come to fruition. So obvious advice, when you're doing longer enduros, maybe break up the stream into two. I have a Sebring 12-hour coming up in a couple of weeks, so I think what I might do there is try and do the full event on a single stream, so for around 12-13 hours, just as a bit of a test to see if YouTube can handle that when it comes to publishing post-stream. And then if not, well, we'll know that it then needs to be, at least 2 parts when you're streaming for as long as 12 hours. But just something to bear in mind, if you don't want to have that issue, make sure you have a part 1, part 2, maybe even a part 3 for a 24-hour race, just to make sure that YouTube is going to publish the content post stream, because it's always a bit of a shame if that's not the case. That'll do it for this one. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a baseline to work from. I would expect some trial and error and a little bit of an adventure, just to make sure the settings are working exactly as they need to for your specific PC and internet setup. It's going to be slightly different for all of us. So let me know in the comments if there's anything you would do differently, or if you're having any particular issues, and I'll try and jump in at where I can. Next up on the channel will be another short video, I think, this time on Race Labs and 4K streaming, but with overlays. That was another combination that took me a couple of months to get going, but I'm really happy with how that's looking now on the 4K stream. So I wanted to just do a separate piece of content on the most recent version of Race Labs, as the interface has changed quite a bit from one of my prior videos. And then specifically what I'm going to focus on is how I, got into maintaining smooth gameplay, but being able to run 4K overlays, not just for me, but also for viewers on the stream as well. So look out for that in the next week or so. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.